Hey guys, this is VinylicPuma, and did you know that under 10% of Tiny Tina's Wonderlands players have made it to Chaos Level 20? Seriously, hop onto your achievements or trophies and check it out. It is very unfortunate to say the least, and someone needs to do something about it. Since I recently marathoned this game and made it to Chaos Level 20, I figured I'd share with you guys some of my tips for how to actually get there. We'll start with preparation and eventually get into some strategies you can implement. And of course, if you guys see something that I missed, definitely feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments section below. But we've got a lot of stuff to go over here, so let's just go ahead and get started. Tip number 1, get some legendary equipment. The sad fact of the matter is that you will ultimately need legendary equipment as you progress towards Chaos Level 20. Those decent weapons you're using right now may have to be swapped out for what are usually legendaries. While what gear you're going to use is going to greatly depend on the type of build you have, for example, a melee player will gravitate towards good melee weapons versus a spells player gravitating towards spells, there are, in my view, a few universal recommendations I can make. While it's tough to get your hands on one since it's a world drop, the Buffmeister is absolutely essential for making Chaos Levels 10 through 20 manageable, and even kind of turns them into a cakewalk. Think of the Buffmeister like Borderlands 2's B-Shield, however, it's like a castable damage boost. It makes lousy weapons good, and already good weapons great. And if you can get one of these, you're set to go to Chaos Level 20. Another weapon I'd recommend is the Masterwork Handbow. I'd argue this is absolutely essential for whenever you take on the Son of a Witch boss, as it allows you to easily take out the Spectral Aegis bird that constantly is restoring his shield. Just aim at the boss's face and spam your shots, and you'll usually not only out-DPS his shield regen, but you'll also take out the bird as well. Beyond that, some other equipment I would recommend would be things like the Liquid Cooling Pistol, the Queen's Cry Pistol if you can get it from a world drop, and I personally really like Lil K's Bread Slicer and the Imp. And of course, you can always pick up a green Rarity Nightshade from the tutorial level. In fact, I highly recommend you do this if you're looking for a decent cryo weapon, and chaotic variants do appear from time to time. I'll leave a card on this video about the Nightshade if you're interested. Ward-wise, I'd recommend the Cursed Wit since it's nice for the damage boosts, though right now I'm mainly using a maced Wardu. That said, you can really just use about anything that has a really high capacity. Or at least that's what works for me. Tip number 2, optimize your build/skill tree. Being aware of your character class's strengths and abilities and maximizing them will make progressing through the Chaos Chamber much easier. For example, maximizing the ability to restore your shield when casting as a spell shot is a good idea. So picking up skills like Mage Armor and equipping gear that boosts your wards and your ability to restore them upon a casting would be a really good idea. Getting a bigger shield can also greatly help in this area as well, as 10% of 5,000 is always more than 10% of 1,000. Conversely, you may not want to use that approach depending on what gear you have. For example, the Cursed Wit works best when it's depleted. Every time you cast a spell, you're going to restore your shield, which in turn is going to make you lose whatever bonuses the Cursed Wit could provide. That is not optimized and will inevitably make things way harder than they really should be. You don't really need to go over the top with optimization, but in general, you do want to prevent kinks in your gear/build setups like I just mentioned. Personally, I was able to get to Chaos Level 20 pretty easily without a super optimized setup, but in general, just try to be aware of where your skill points are going, and once you commit to a particular skill or ability, stay committed to it and ensure that you are more or less optimized. Tip number 3, optimize your myth ranks. While I guess this could roll into build optimization, optimizing your myth rank strategy is also a good idea as well. This is because myth rank not only provides hero stat boosts, but it also provides elemental and other stat boosts as well. As a general rule, and like before, focus on maxing out in a particular area before you move on to the next. So ideally, by the time you've got a myth rank of 40, you should have maxed out dexterity, wisdom, strength, and intelligence. Then of course move on to a new particular stat that you want to improve. If you'd like a rough hierarchy to follow, I'd say it's as follows. Hero stats first, elemental damage type second, and then everything else. This will be pretty easy to do with the exception of the Druid tree, as you can very easily miss attunement and go straight into elements like I did. However, just try to shoot for optimizing hero stats first, followed by flat elemental damage boosts, and then sort of just do everything else. Tip number 4. Consider getting a companion. Assuming you're playing solo, having a companion is a good idea. Fortunately, as long as you select a Clawbringer, Spore Warden, or Graveborn as a subclass, then you should have a companion. While some secondary class combinations suit certain primaries better than others, simply having any companion will be hugely beneficial as it can revive you mid-fights, and you can use it to aggro enemies and various bosses. Concerning the former, having a companion run up to you and revive you during a fight can be really helpful, especially if you get a Dragon Lord roll that causes insta-death orbs to emit from the enemies you defeat, and then those things hit you and you go on to fight for your life instantly. Concerning the latter, having a semi-robust teammate is especially helpful as it takes all of the punishment while you can heal and regroup. It's the perfect distraction and has been a popular thing to do since the days of the Necromancers and longbow turret deployment. Some of the bosses become much easier provided you have a companion, so guys, just get one. But alright, so now let's talk a little bit about progression with these next couple of tips, starting with tip number 5, which is going to be to avoid the Dragon Lord and Dragon Lord portals. While you will have to encounter the Dragon Lord at the end of the very first encounter, I'd recommend you avoid him afterwards, especially if you're just trying to get to Chaos level 20. This simply falls in with the idea of just making things easier rather than making them harder. It's also important to note that you are not penalized for choosing the easier of the crystals whenever you meet the Dragon Lord. So with that in mind, you might as well always opt for the easier of the two. While you will get less crystals, I'd argue some of the hard options are more trouble than they're worth. For example, as you progress with the hard crystal selected, you'll be put in situations where you have random death orbs flying at you that immediately put you in a fight for your life. If it's a choice between that and something like anytime you deplete an enemy health bar, it covers the ground in a random elemental damage type, I'd choose the latter. Something else to consider as well is the ease with which you can complete the side objectives for each stage. Assuming you complete the task assigned, you get to smash 2 dice as opposed to just 1. If taking the easier challenge and avoiding the Dragon Lord in general helps you do that, you should do that because that's more guaranteed crystals. If your goal is to simply get to Chaos level 20, again, you're not penalized for going the easier route. Tip number 6. Avoid wasting crystals. While I'm not going to tell you to not make your next encounter elite, I think it would be a good idea for you to only do so if you're confident you can complete the secondary objective. This is because as you progressively make more encounters elite, your prospects for a return on your investment can decrease. Sure, the first time is only 50 crystals or so, but over time this tends to increase, and you really need to be sure that you are able to recoup whatever crystals you've just spent. If you get a string of lousy side objectives paired with certain enemies, like stand in this area and defeat enemies, and you're having to deal with these cyclops that are constantly spewing acid on you, or you get into another situation where you're collecting orbs to feed them to the fire monster, and you really hate these situations, you're just wasting crystals if you don't plan on completing those objectives. If you get Destroy the Dragon statue, however, and you like doing that, then maybe make that encounter elite. Again, I'm not telling you to not go elite, but just make sure you can recoup whatever crystals you've just spent. Okay, now for these next 3 tips, I want to talk about bosses, and we'll start with tip number 7, which involves what I consider to be the easier bosses. In my view, the easiest bosses in the Chaos Trials are both Zomboss and Lechance. There's a good chance you don't want to hear very much about Zomboss because you've beaten him already. However, simply having decent equipment and either matching the proper elements with his health bars or using strong dark magic or frost weapons will usually end this fight. It really is just a matter of spamming bullets at him until he goes down. For Lechance, you simply need a good cryo weapon and some endurance. Shoot him in the face and gradually over time just whittle down his HP. Most of the problems you'll have are with his minions, and ultimately I just recommend you try to leave some around in case you go down. If you play your cards right, you'll beat Lechance pretty easily, and as far as a lot of the bosses in the Chaos Trials go, I think he's a pushover. Now for tip 8, we'll move on to the moderately difficult bosses, which in my view, those are the Dragon Lord, the Parasite from Tangle Drift, and the Banshee. For the Parasite, simply having some quality equipment and a Buffmeister can turn this into a relatively easy fight. If you don't have those, make sure you bring something decent to strip the shield, maybe a good fire weapon for the regular health bar, and a cryo weapon for the final phase. Also, having a spell that ripples the ground, whether it be dark magic or fire-based, will help crowd control some of the shrooms and other enemies that appear, preventing them from all ganging up on you and putting you into fight for your life. As long as you're vigilant, the Parasite can go down fairly easily. For the Banshee, the key here I'd say is to have a decent fire or physical weapon, some patience, and to simply learn the repetitive pattern. Whenever the fog goes up, run to the pool in the center of the stage and proceed to jump when it's blue and crouch when it's purple. When the fog subsides, run out of the pool and up onto one of the sides. This will help you dodge the Banshee's charge attack, and from there, you can simply take cover behind one of the trees as she throws crystals or whatever those things are at you. The Banshee is actually probably one of the first bosses that will give you some trouble, or at least that was my case, but ultimately if you learn the pattern and you're patient, you can beat this thing pretty easily. For the Dragon Lord Phase 1, focus on annihilating his health bar and just be cognizant of whenever he hurls ice spikes. He will usually emit a corrosive wave when he does this, and just jump over it whenever you see it. For Phase 2 and between phases, take out the spectral dragons he occasionally summons, while also taking care to shoot the crystals he activates that create purple ground hazards. Once you've done that, you can shoot him like normal, and in that sense, it's a lot like Phase 1. For Phase 3, where he starts to fly around, simply eliminate his armor health bar, and then once you've done that, swap between shooting him and Bernadette whenever the other has the yellow aura. If you're patient, he'll eventually go down, and you'll find he's not so bad compared to some of the other bosses I'm about to discuss. Speaking of which, that brings us to tip number 9, which will be for the hard bosses. Excluding raid bosses, I'd say that Vorkanar, Drail, Son of a Witch, Nightmare, and maybe Salissa will give you the most trouble. To beat Vorkanar, the key is to simply stay on the outer ring of the arena, strafing to the left and spamming bullets at either his head or the orbs on his side until he goes down. Whenever he launches the fire orbs at you, stop shooting and run to the left to avoid getting hit. Just be aware there are 2 phases and make sure you plant the bomb on his head at the end of Phase 1. It's worth noting your companion, if you have one, can take most of the abuse here. Simply let it get beat up by Vorkanar while you focus on dealing as much damage to Vorkanar as possible. To beat Son of a Witch, I'd highly recommend you acquire the Masterwork handbow and spam bullets from it into his face. The reason for this, as I'm sure you can see here, is that it allows you to deal with his spectral aegis that comes out and regenerates his shield. You'll need to stick with the handbow until you can defeat his human form and reach Phase 3. For Phase 3, simply spam him with ice weaponry until he goes down. It's much easier than the prior phases, and it's safe to say that once you reach this phase, you're in the clear. Just try to stay alive. To beat Nightmare, just bring the highest DPS equipment you have, and whenever he charges you, try shooting his head, as you can sometimes get him to stop, or try running towards him and jumping out of the way at the last second. That doesn't always work, but when it does, it definitely does. Obviously, whenever he whirlwinds, he's invulnerable, so just run away. And of course, dealing with Nightmare in general, having a companion will make the fight way easier. I think it's important to mention that for Phase 3, don't hesitate when he goes into shock form. You want to be really aggressive here and try to take him out as fast as possible, especially when he's in the arena, because this is the time you can really unload on him. Otherwise, he warps out of the arena and he becomes much harder to hit. To beat Salissa, the key here is to try and keep your distance from her and her attacks, as well as keep at least a few of the enemies she spawns alive. The difference between Phase 1 and Phase 2 is she'll spawn some sharks in Phase 2. Take those out as soon as possible, and then repeat what you did in Phase 1. The biggest problem you'll have here is the shock crystals she emits, as well as the big water attack that she'll cast. Like Vorkanar, having a companion here to absorb some of the punishment can make this fight a lot easier. As for Drail, this is a situation where you'll wish you had the Buffmeister. Phase 1 isn't so bad, it's Phase 2 that's the real problem, because every time he raises his spear, he recovers a lot of his shield. In these instances, you should buff up and try to out-DPS him. It will take a while, but if you remain aggressive and you can stay alive, he'll eventually go down. Once you're in Phase 3, I'd say you're in the clear. Just don't go in to fight for your life. And finally, we have tip number 10, which will be on how to spend your hard-earned crystals. Once you complete a Chaos Trial, you'll have the opportunity to spend the crystals you acquired throughout your run. What I would highly recommend you do is, rather than spend all of your crystals across various rabbits across the room, instead simply pick one for a particular weapon or item type and invest every single crystal you have into it. So for example, if you decide you want a new assault rifle, pick the bunny that spits assault rifles. And if you want a new melee weapon, pick the bunny that spits melee weapons. The advantage of doing things this way is that it greatly increases your ability to acquire legendary equipment. Your odds of getting a decent legendary pistol go up dramatically if you're spending all 2,000 crystals on the pistol bunny, as opposed to spending them all sporadically over multiple different bunnies. Especially if the legendaries you're looking for drop from the Chaos Chamber specifically. So if you're trying to get something like the Circuitous Gyre or the Rain of Arrows, you may find it's much easier to go this route. I've also found this is a great way to get other legendaries that are of the generic world drop variety. For example, I've gotten things like the Snake Stick, the Mage Staff, the Live Wire, the Blazing Volley, and a few more. I'm not going to guarantee it will work for you, but if you're trying to get a Buffmeister, you may want to try and spend crystals on spells. In fact, if you manage to get a Buffmeister this way, let everyone know in the comments section below. In general, whenever you spend your crystals at the end, commit to one item type as opposed to several. This will ensure a superior result. Alright guys, I think that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you enjoyed this video, definitely be sure to smash like, click the bell to be notified when I upload next, and as always, and again, thank you so much for supporting this channel. Take care, and have a good one.